All right, so my name is Darren Sugg, and I'm the lead designer on Fortnite.
Let's start by talking a little about how you've seen Fortnite evolve since you first got involved with this project.
Yeah, so Fortnite started out as a game jam project with a pretty small team, and they were sort of iterating away, and they sort of like had a really cool nugget of gameplay, and then over time, sort of more people got added to the project, and they started bringing a little bit of their own like personality into it, and Fortnite sort of evolved into the sort of much bigger game that it is today, where it has a lot of the epic action, it's fast paced, and has a lot of sort of the whimsical, sort of zany nature of this particular art style. So it's evolved from a very small nugget into this truly, big project that a lot of people here at the organization are into.
How would you summarize if someone said, Fortnite, what is it all about?
Fortnite is the distillation of when you were a kid and you were in that backyard piece of woods, and basically building that fortress, and like out of planks, with old nails and found boards, and then you're standing on top of it, and you're like, you're imagining what it would be like to have all these monsters around you. It's like it sort of captures that childhood feeling of both building and sort of being heroic at the same time. That's my view of it anyway.
And you just mentioned monsters. Can you talk a little about the concept of the monsters and how they now enter into the world?
Yeah, so the way sort of Fortnite's world is structured is that there's a mysterious storm that has sort of taken over, and from that storm, these creatures are spawned. And so every time that there's a lightning strike, another portal is opened up, and creatures sort of pour out of it. So there's a sort of mysterious link between the storms and the monsters in the world. So we use that as a sort of gameplay method, and it also works as a relatable concept for the players, because they understand, like, hey, like, the bad guys are going to come from the north because that's where the storm front is. And so that conceit of something like we got to do really cool lighting and storm effects also translated into something that players grokked as a gameplay mode. I'm like, oh yeah, I get it, the storm is blowing in from this side, and that's where the bad guys are going to come in. So that was sort of our tying those two things together, of like the visualization of cool thunderstorms, and everyone gets that thunderstorms are a little bit, with lightning strikes, are scary, and they're not good things. And so we got a bunch of things for free there. And then the flip side is it also communicated a bunch of our gameplay intent, which is like, you don't want to be standing in the middle of storms, and don't get struck by lightning, and those kind of things that we get for free. So.
And that's something that evolved from day to night, whereas originally the monsters were going to come out when the sun went down.
Yeah, I mean, in the way back day, we had like, hey, there's a very primal understanding of light dark. Like when you're in the day, you're safe, and when you're at night, like that's the scary times. That's also a primal sort of feeling. But over time, we started to sort of experiment with the idea of like, that means if we stick completely to that field, that there's a fixed set of time for day, and there's a fixed set of time for night. And that just makes sense, because of the relatedness, like people expect that. But the problem is like sometimes for combat pacing, you want to have shorter fights, or you want to have really long fights. And if you always sync them up to a day-night cycle, you lose some flexibility there. It's like, oh, you can't just have a short 1 or 2 minute fights, because the night is, 8 minutes long. So that sort of created some interesting problems for us in terms of the pacing. We said, you know what, we just backed out of that and said, what's equally as good, and that's why we relied on the weather. And so the weather is just as primal, at least in my view, of like, people understand those concepts in similar ways to day and night. So that's that. And plus, people know like a squall may be a couple of minutes and then it's fine, but then you could have a storm that lasts all night. So it sort of accomplished our game design goals while still maintaining the relatability.
Now, the pre-alpha version we just played has about a dozen different monsters. Can you kind of walk us through some of the main ones that people would be going up against?
Yeah, totally. So we basically have different categories of monsters. We have what we consider, artillery units, and they're about actually disrupting walls from afar and really blowing up your base. We have two different varieties of that. We have the Flinger and the Lobber. The Lobber just is literally lobbing in projectiles into the world that both either blow up areas of the walls or deny players area to run through, because it'll put like poison gas clouds in there. But the flinger actually takes other monsters and flings them up onto your structures. So if you don't build a roof, they can just go up into your base and end up inside your inner sanctum of your base. So it like sort of has players having to build different pieces. And then our standard unit is what we consider sort of our fodder, which is the husk itself. That is sort of our analog to the basic trooper, and he runs around. He's not particularly smart, and his job is to tear down walls. But he needs help of other creatures, and one of those other creatures that comes with him is our propane tank husk, affectionately known as the Sploder, and he carries a propane tank. And if you let him set that down, he'll detonate that and blow up a huge area. And so the reason why he's dangerous is that gives him the ability to sort of disable traps and stop some of your machinations against it. So it forces players to change in that behavior. And then we have our tank, which is our smasher, and he basically, what he does is exactly what he says. He will come at ground-based walls and just try to punch his way through to make room for the other husks to come through. So he's very devastating to basic walls and lower upgraded structures, and because he'll destroy your structural support, and then the whole fort will come crashing down. So those are the big beats of the categories. But over time we can talk more about all the different creature types.